Hi, today I thought I'd show you how you might mark a stencil type design for quilting. I've done this one up here. As you can see, I've got a stencil of this butterfly and I've marked it and I've quilted it. I've done free motion quilting but using the stencil as my guide. So I thought I'd show you how you might mark particularly onto a dark fabric but also onto the light fabric but using a stencil. There's other ways of doing quilting, other ways of marking. You can trace and do all those sorts of things, but today we're using a stencil. So I've got this butterfly stencil and I want to be able to quilt it onto this light background, so I've got my fabric and my batting and the backing all ready to go, and I've got a dark piece as well, just to show you some of the different ways that you can mark things. So when you're marking onto a darker fabric, or sometimes just a busy fabric is kind of like a dark fabric too, it's much harder to see the lines of a regular type marker. We might use the water erasable. Usually they've got a blue ink in them and it's water. You have to use water to erase the mark, but it leaves a nice line. So I've already marked the butterfly here with the blue. It's not super strong and you might think, oh, that's plenty strong enough. You'll be surprised how strong it needs to be once you get under the sewing machine so that you can actually see where you're going. So make sure that you can actually see your lines. But it was as simple as marking in each stenciled little gap. They have these little gaps that you can fit your pen in, and you can just run your pen around those. So some pens are very fine. There's different of these washout pens. Make sure that you can see your line before you remove the stencil. So you might want to tape it with a little bit of just masking tape onto your fabric so that it doesn't move for you, and then just have a little look before you take it off to make sure that you can see all of your lines. So look on both sides and things like that. So that would be a way to mark just on a lighter coloured fabric that you can see the blue marks on. That works really well. When we go on to a darker fabric, it doesn't work quite so well because the blue line is most likely not going to show. If I draw on this here, I can't see that blue line. So that's not going to help me at all if I want to take that to the sewing machine. And we do want to help ourselves. So if I was going to mark it with, you can get a white marking pen. Now this is a Clover product, this particular one. It's a white, not a gel pen. Don't go using a regular gel pen because they're permanent in the fabric. You want one that's going to disappear. This is also a water erasable one, or you can iron these ones and the colour will come out, but I probably would still use water. Just be aware of that when you're using these marking pens that say that they're water soluble or heat soluble. I would strongly suggest that you completely immerse your piece into water to remove the lines, because sometimes the marks can come back just when you don't want them to. Perhaps a little bit of moisture in the air and it might be a smudgy line and it's not so attractive. If you've taken it right out of the fabric, it's not likely to do that. I know about that. I did it on the top. I had done a very nice little corded design on the top one time, sprayed it like the instructions said. This was many years ago, and wore the top, went out to the shopping mall, looked down, and I had all this blue all over my top. It was a white top, of course. It wasn't attractive. It's not attractive on your quilts either. Rinse it right out of the fabric and then you won't have a problem. So if I'm going to use the white pen on here, it's a little bit trickier to use because you might draw it on and you think, oh, that's good, and I might go over it twice so that I can just get a good line there because I've got to be able to see it, and you might look and you think, oh no, there's nothing there, that pen is not working. However, give it time. It is actually just starting to work now. As it dries, it leaves you with a little white line, not a very strong white line, and hopefully any second now you'll be able to see that white line. So I've just done this little feeler from the butterfly and it's just coming up there. So it won't be a very strong mark, but it will be a mark. But the white pens take longer to come to the surface. It's because it needs to dry for that white to show up. So I'm just going to let that sit for a minute so that hopefully you can see a little bit more of the design as it comes up. So you can just start to see it there. So not a super strong line, but hopefully you can see that there is a line appearing where I've drawn it there. Another way to mark a quilting design on a dark fabric, you can get a product called a quick swipe. It's like a little pouncer. You could use even just like some corn flour or something in with a little makeup pouncer or something like that would probably work quite well, as long as you know that you're going to be washing it out of your fabric, not leaving these products in. This one also is a heat removal one, but I would still go for the same thing. I always like to get everything out of the fabric and not leave it there, because you don't even know that maybe 10 years later it might have done not so much damage, but it might just come back and haunt you. We don't want that going on. So a pouncer of some sort, this has got a white powder in it, and you can just swipe that over and just go over your stencil markings. It's going to give me my measurements that's on the stencil as well, which I don't need. And then you can, again, same thing, you might want to tape it down, but you want to hold it in place. Make sure that those marks are all nice and clear. Now this is, being a powder, is likely to brush away and disappear a little bit more quickly, but I think that looks pretty good. There's my butterfly, all marked, ready for me to do some sewing on now, and that's going to stay long enough for me to machine over it, but it will disappear when I add the iron or wash it out. The other thing to mention about stencils, because of the way stencils are made, they have to have little joining parts on them, and so that line is not complete. They don't all meet up, so you can see that on here these lines are not all meeting up. If you're not sure that you can still sew it without those lines meeting up, because you don't want to stop and start where the lines stop and start, you might want to come back with your pen and just join those lines up, so that you remember when you get to them that you've got to do that and make it a more flowing sort of design. And the same thing with the blue here. I'm going to do a little bit of stitching on this one that I've marked on this light in a minute, just to show you. See, none of these lines here come up. This body here would be all one piece, so you'd want to have that, and then his head here might be like that. The feelers would probably be attached and connected there. These bits here are most likely attached to the body. So if you feel that you need to, come in and make those marks, so that you don't suddenly get to something and you think, oh no, where was I meant to go now? Because that actually is not at all helpful, to be trying to work that out as you're sewing. There's enough going on when you're sewing without having to work out where you're meant to go. So if you just wanted to join those up, then I suggest that you go ahead and do that. You may not need to, you may be quite happy not joining them up. And the same thing applies if you're hand quilting. You're going to still be joining those lines up, and that's going to still need to be done, if that's what you need to do. You might be able to join them up as you sew. So I'm going to go to the machine now and just start a little bit of this just to show you. I've got an orange thread in so that you can see. This one I've done in the lovely turquoisey blue colour, but I'll do the orange because the ink is that colour. I didn't want to do it in the same colour so that you couldn't see where I've been. So I'm going to start on the body, and I'll just do one side of him so that you can see where I go, because I don't need to take it out all the time if I'm just doing free motion. So I've got my machine set up, my feed teeth are down, I've got my free motion foot on, and I'm just going to start sewing down here. So it's just a little stitch. I'm going to come. So when I'm doing a design like this, I might double over myself so that I can get back to the same place I was at before. So I've gone around the little head, and I'm going to come back up the head because I want to do these feelers while I'm in the region. So the thing when you're working on designs free motion that you've marked like this with a stencil, or if you've drawn them on, is that you're never going to be able to stay exactly on the line. And see, I've wandered off there. For me, that's not a problem. I don't mind that slightly wonky look. The main thing is, if you come off a line, is to keep going and keep your line as smooth as you can. Don't do a sudden jump back onto a line. So I'm just coming back over everything, and it just, because it's just an outline, I quite like that slightly solid look that it gets. Back onto the head so that that's got double all the way around it. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to start on this wing. going to come around that again because I'm going to double stitch everything. And I'd wander off occasionally, but as I said, I'm quite happy about that. You may not be as happy. You don't have to double stitch it, but what it allows you to do is come back and do little bits to connect them up. So I'm going to come up the next little bit here. Join that into that one, and then I'm going to come back over it. And if I come back into the center again, I'm ready to go on to the next one. Keep an eye where you're going. When you've got something as small as this, of course, you can turn your work if you need to, and sometimes it's better to turn it. It's quite good not to turn it, but if it's going to help your stitching, it's worth turning it. So now we've got a little dilemma here because we've got this line that comes out on the outside that we haven't done yet. So before I go all the way back in, my aim is to not keep stopping and starting where possible, so I'm going to come up now and do that. And I can come back onto that line now. Come back in there and have a little look see here what's going on next. I might come back up along there and around to this line here, and if you need to turn it now would be a time when it might work better for you. I'm going to come all the way around that bottom wing at this stage. And back up there. Just remember those blue lines won't be there when you remove them. So all you'll see is your stitching lines. Now while I'm in here, I'm going to do this little inside shape. Come back up that line. Come in this one because it's still only single. And then I can come back to my body. And I can now continue on and do the same thing on the other side. So I just wanted to show you how I'd go about marking something with a stencil and how I'd go about stitching it. As I said, I'm quite happy to have this slightly double line look about my quilting. If you don't want that, then you might just want to do a single line of stitching, that's fine. You may find you've got to stop and start more often and then thread your ends in so that they don't make a mess. But I just thought if I went through how you might mark it, you might use a blue washout pen, you might use a white washout pen, you might use a powder and a pouncer of some sort, and that will cover most things for you. Working on printed fabrics, if you're quilting a design, I have to say that an elaborate quilting design on printed fabric, if it's a busy fabric, often gets lost. So think about what the fabric is that you're working onto so that you don't lose all that work and effort that you're putting into it. However, if you are working on a design fabric that's a little bit busy, you may find that the blue will work, you may find you've got to use something else, but make sure it's something that isn't going to be long lasting and staying where it was, so, or come back to haunt you later on. But it was just to give you an idea of how you might use a stencil for some of the quilting. Thank you.